Okay, hopefully that means that we are live and good to go. I want to say just a very warm welcome to all of our speakers and our attendees that are joining us for today's webinar. I think we're covering a few time zones here, so I should say probably a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening to both our speakers and our attendees. And thank you very much for joining us to find out a little bit more about why the World Technology Universities Network chose to mark today's event, which is dedicated to the International Day of Zero Waste. My name is Denise Whitehead, and I'm the Development Manager at the World Technology Universities Network. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction about the WTUN, a little bit about the theme of today's session, and then I'll hand you over to our chair and facilitator for today's event, Dr. James Innes, or Rob, as I'll be referring to him throughout, who's on the call. He will then also be facilitating the discussion, and we'll have two speakers from Mindanao State University in the Philippines and also from Atlantic Technological University in Ireland. So before I set the scene a little bit about International Day of Zero Waste, I just wanted to say a few words about the World Technology Universities Network and the reason that we're all gathered and our affiliation to that to this organisation. So the World Technology Universities Network is a global network of technology-focused universities, and our diverse membership is united by a commitment to the inclusive advancement of sustainable technology and scientific teaching and research. Each of our members demonstrates a commitment to truly equitable innovation, which has a benefit for people and place. So WTUN members, of which Bradford, Mindanao State and Atlantic Technological University are one, deliver teaching and research and innovation, which has a direct benefit to people and society, driving technical and social innovation and entrepreneurship, and developing graduates who are global citizens and capable of being leaders of the future. They work closely with local, national and international government, industry and other organisations, promoting interdisciplinary cooperation to have a demonstrable impact for the future. We're very pleased, as I said, to welcome our chair and speakers for today's event, representing WTUN members, Atlantic Technological University in Ireland, the University of Bradford in the UK, and Mindanao State University in the Philippines. I will hand you over to our chair and facilitator in just a moment, but I just wanted to say a few words about the reason that we're gathered here today and why the WTUN wanted to mark this event. So on the 30th of March, so we're a couple of days after, that falling on a Sunday this year, the 30th of March each year, the International Day of Zero Waste, facilitated jointly by the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, and the UN Human Settlements Programme, highlights the importance of bolstering waste management globally and the need to promote sustainable consumption and production patterns to address the waste pollution crisis. So they say that, or they provide the details to say that every year humanity creates between 2.1 billion and 2.3 billion tonnes of municipal solid waste. And without action, urgent action, the annual waste generation will hit 3.8 billion tonnes by 2050. Waste pollution threatens human health, costs the global economy hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and aggravates the triple planetary crisis: the crisis of climate change, the crisis of nature, land and biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution and waste. This year's theme, Towards Zero Waste in Fashion and Textiles, focuses on the urgent need to take action to reduce the waste impact from the fashion and textiles sector and promote sustainability and circularity. So please can I introduce our chair and facilitator for this event, Dr. Rob Innes, currently a postdoctoral research associate at the Faculty of Engineering and Digital Technologies at the University of Bradford. Dr. Innes spent 4 years working on the £1 million low carbon manufacturing grant at the University of University of Bradford, concerned with recycling thermoset rubber and difficulty to separating polymer blends. Prior to this, Dr. Innes obtained his PhD in material science at the University of Manchester's National Graphene Institute, where he worked on I'm going to get some of these words wrong, Rob, you're going to have to correct me, elastomers and nanofillers in order to solve industry-specific problems. At the University of Bradford, in addition to his research and teaching load, he also has Dr. Innes is also an Enterprise Fellow at the Bradford Redunkin Thaler Enterprise Ecosystem, through which he is currently developing a recycled trainer brand. His research interests include, but are not limited to, I'm sure, elastomers, thermoplastic vulcanites, recycling, circular economy, polymer nanocomposites, devulcanization, and revulcanization. And I'm sure if any of those topics are of interest to you or anyone watching, he'd be more than happy to hear from you in the future. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Rob, who will say a little bit more about why we're all here gathered today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction, and yeah, I'm really looking to chair this meeting. International Day of Zero Waste is something that is going to become increasingly more and more important as we produce increasingly more and more waste as it stands. And in particular, really for all industries, but fashion and textiles, of course, is what we're focused on today. We've come to a world where today over half of fashion brands market themselves as sustainable. They include terms like plastic-free, organic, recycled, and there are some brands that go even further than that and move towards zero waste. Yet at the same time, 88% of consumers want more attention on reducing pollution. And I think it's very difficult for a lot of consumers to get transparency on how sustainable brands are, with so many of them claiming to be sustainable and using different metrics. So, what is zero waste in the context of the fashion industry? Obviously, you've got the start of production, the use phase, and then end of life. How do you achieve zero waste in each of those components? Can you minimize waste during production, maybe using recycled or waste materials? During the use phase, how do you improve sustainability? Can we have reuse applications that are better in terms of waste hierarchy than recycling and alternative routes? And I believe Dr. Maguire will be giving us some input on that use phase as well. And then at end of life, what happens? How do you, if you're talking about zero waste, how do you prevent there being an end of life? How do you keep that material in use? And Professor Bautista is going to be talking to us about circular economy and how to design that in as well. So I think there's a lot of circular economy models and upcycling and reuse, but I think transparency is something that is still very, very difficult. So without further ado, I'll move on to our first speaker, which is Professor Charlou Bautista, as it's been said, from Mindanao University in the Philippines. He was the former chief of the IP office. He's worked a lot in marketing specialism, as well as teaching across a broad range of topics, including business strategy. And today he'll be giving us a talk on circular solutions, especially in relation to the startup Neo Raunau. So I will hand over to you now, Professor Bautista.
Thank you, Dr. Inns, for that introduction. I would like to share my screen for me to start my presentation. All right, so I would like first to express my thanks to the WTUN for this wonderful opportunity to share with you the initiatives and activities of the startup that I had mentored and I had been mentoring at the moment, the NEA right now. I would like to express as well good morning and good evening and good afternoon to everyone who is with us today. I am Professor Charlou Bautista, and I am a faculty member of the Mindanao State University Philippines, and I also work as a special assistant to the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs. So I would like to share with you this title, NEA Now, Teaching Sustainability Through Circular Solutions. The fashion industry is producing actually more than ever, as mentioned by Dr. Ames earlier. Where do all these clothes go when we're done with them? So they are actually ending up in the landfills. 92 million tons textile waste pile up in the landfills or are incinerated, contributing to pollution, resource depletion, and climate change. According to the United Nations Habitat, a garbage truckload of clothes is actually dumped and burned away every second. This wasteful system harms both the people and the planet, impacting workers, communities, and the ecosystem. In the report of Ruiz, it discusses that the global fashion industry is actually valued right now at over one 1.5 trillion dollars, which is as destructive as it is lucrative. In her report, she tackled that uh, the the fashion industry waste is actually amounting to 92 million tons every year, and that the two countries that produce most is China at 20 million tons and US at 70 million tons. Clothing and textiles currently make up at least 7% of the amount of waste in the global landfill. And then between 80 and 100 billion new clothing garments are produced globally every year. 87% of the materials and fibers used to make clothing will end up either in the incinerators or landfills, and that only 20% of discarded textiles are collected, and only 1% of clothes will get recycled into new garments, which actually is devastating, especially harming our environment. However, it is not just the industry that we can blame with this kind of situation. We as consumers are actually equally responsible, since um, we have um, we have this mindset of going into fashions that are new and that are stylish. That's these statistics actually show how consumer demand has driven the rise of fast fashion. That according to the report of Ruiz in 2024, at the current rate, global clothing sales would reach up to 160 million tons by 2050. We own more clothes than we used to, and we wear uh, them less. 15 years ago, our wardrobes are actually simpler and more sustainable, but today we find ourselves buying 60% more clothing than before, only to discard each item after wearing them 50% as often. On average, every single person in the world uses 11.4 kilograms of clothing every year. This produces the equivalent of 442 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions per capita. Imagine the devastation that it will cause in the environment. Global clothing production doubled between 2000 and 2015 due to the increased demand for cheap clothing. So the consumer is actually one of the drivers of fashion industry waste in the environment. In the Philippines, textile waste from manufacturing and post-production processes continues to accumulate, contributing to environmental degradation and resource depletion. So the proportion of Filipinos throwing away their clothing after wearing them once is, as shown in the data in your screen, 29% of the Filipinos have thrown their clothing after a single use, while millennials are buying more than 50% of the new clothes they own within the year. So this will pile up. Given how much Filipinos purchase and dispose of clothing, just imagine the scale of textile waste being produced by this consumer behavior. Since this buying habit is being tolerated, clothing production continued to contribute in water pollution and plastics from laundering. So this data that we have shown, that have been shown in the screen, are actually causing devastations in the environment. So with these data and the current situation in the Philippines, there is indeed a need to address these. The Mindanao State University through the International Affairs and Linkages Office, um, headed by our director, Director Melba Angni, was given the chance to be trained by the Rochester Institute of Technology in New York on circular entrepreneurship. And I am one of the trainees. I'm so thankful that I was part of the training. It's because I was able to embrace the learnings that I've learned from the circular entrepreneurship training. As one of the trainees, I was able to appreciate circular economy principles and made sure to integrate these into my class discussions, particularly in the opportunity identification process as my BS entrepreneurship students are preparing for their business proposal. As part of our training with RIT, we are actually required to submit a circular business plan. This has been a wonderful opportunity for me as it brings back memories of the social enterprise that we're able to establish with my students before in 2016, way back in 2016. Our initiative is focused on recycling plastic bottles, bed foams, discarded bed foams at the same time, sachets into eco-friendly emoticon chairs. These are actually chairs made of plastic bottles inside, and inside the plastic bottles are wrappers. And to make it more comfortable, we covered it with bed foams that are discarded already from the university students. So we've gathered them, and then we come up with this kind of products. We call it emoticon chair. However, this kind of enterprise ended up way back in 2017 because of the Marawi siege. Due to the Marawi siege, the project was discontinued. My students had already graduated, and I took a study leave for my master's. Inspired by this experience, I proposed to RIT as part of my requirement the revival of the Kashura enterprise. This time focusing on textile waste to address the growing concerns of fast fashion. As I continue mentoring students in implementing their business ventures, one group courageously took the challenge of pursuing circular fashion under the name Nayarena. And I look forward that Nayarena will also embrace the concept of the Kashura enterprise, where we integrate culture in the designs of our apparels. So before I proceed in sharing uh, the the work of Neo now, let us first understand what circular economy is and how is it being integrated in the fashion industry. Circular economy is a system where materials never become waste and nature is generated. The target in the circular economy is to make sure that we eliminate the waste and as well as the pollution that is caused by this waste. So as much as possible, we don't extract resources from the environment. Compared to the linear approach or the linear economy, we extract resources. Out from this extraction of resources, we make products, we use the products. After we use the products, we throw away. And this end up in the environment, and which cause pollution to the environment. While circular economy is that we make sure that as long as possible, the the products that we use will still continue in circulation. And if it will end up in the landfill or in the environment, it will help regenerate the environment. That's the target. So in the circular economy, we extract resources. We use these resources to come up with products, and the products are designed into durable products to make sure that the lifespan of the product will last long. And as much as possible, we do not extract resources from the environment, because if the products already are busted, we can make use of them as another resource for coming up with a new product, which is the same concept that Nair now is doing. So the principles of circular economy is there are just three principles, which is to eliminate waste and pollution, to circulate products and materials, and then to regenerate nature. That's why we think of making sure that the products, the resources that we are going to use in coming up with products are resources or materials that can be regenerated when they are thrown in the environment. And these principles can only be achieved with this model, the 7R model. To rethink the way we use materials and to rethink of maybe alternative materials that are less harmful to the environment and that will contribute to the regeneration of the environment. Then we reduce, we repair, we reuse, we refurbish, we recycle, and we recover. And this same model and this 7R model actually can be incorporated in the fashion industry. That's why we can come up with, we can achieve circularity in fashion. Key principles and strategies in circularity in fashion, where we design products for longevity and durability, where we made sure that products are that resources and products are sustainable, and we can recycle these materials. Resource efficiency and the target of zero waste. We can resale, rental, and maybe make use of secondhand markets, and we also next target could be biodegradability, and that the products, the textiles, the garments can be used for composting, and then the closed loop system, the recycling. So these principles, the same principles and strategies actually that Nair now wanted to embrace. So here's the story of Nair now, and these are my students. There are 8 of them who are working on with the circular fashion. Nair now is a startup business led or owned by students in the Philippines, particularly in the Mindanao State University, Marawi City, Lanao del Sur. They are committed to linking eco-conscious consumer with unique sustainable fashion. The name Neo now comes actually from the two terms, which is Neo, which are Neo and Renao, which captures two significant aspects. Neo signifies newness and rebirth, and Renao signifies the value of water, drawing inspiration from Lake Lanao since our university is actually located near the Lanao Lake. And the Maranao people, uh, the Muslim tribe, the Maranao tribe, is actually the name comes from Ranao, which is actually meaning people of the lake. So that's why they draw inspiration from the word Ranao and Neo. Their vision is to embody the Maranao pride in promoting sustainable fashion in the Bangsamoro region and beyond, while nurturing environmental stewardship, social responsibility, and cultural heritage. So our target is also to incorporate cultural designs in our in our products. The mission is to revolutionize fashion in the Bangsamoro region. The Bangsamoro region actually is a region in the Philippines, which has a different form of government, a parliamentary government, the Bangsamoro region of Muslim Mindanao. And beyond, by recycling textiles and um, as well as to uh, recycling textile waste into sustainable and fashionable garments, empowering local artisans, promoting environmental stewardship, and upholding Marano cultural heritage through circular fashion practices. So actually, they are into the NEO mission, which stands for nurture, empower, and organize initiatives that advocate for environmental responsibility, social impact, and the preservation of the Maranao cultural heritage. So I'm very much proud of my students for coming up with this kind of initiative. They are now embraces the 7R model, and we are making sure that all of the 7R is present in their business operation, in their products as well. So these are the 7R and the circular solutions coined in the 7R model of the circular economy principles. Reduce. With Neo now, we reduce, we maintain, we minimize waste at the sources rejected textiles from factory out offcuts and damaged fabrics and secondhand garments from ukay-ukay. Ukay-ukay in the Philippines, same as thrift stores, or from the word dig, we dig into a pile of clothes so that we can buy the right design that we like. Since there are a lot of secondhand clothes that are coming from imported from all over across the globe. to prevent these from landfill waste. So here's their process. They source from from some ukay-ukay donation maybe. There are a lot of people who will be donating to them. Then they laundry these clothes and then they sort them out and then they process them for the design and the kind of products that they are going to come up with depending on the type of garment. Their reuse. Um, we give textiles a second life in there and out. We offer services, mending and redesigning services to revive damaged clothing, and these are their products, the outcome of their products. So we give new life to the garments that are supposed to be thrown or that are thrifted, and we sell it at an affordable price. So we recycle. This is one of our future products. We are doing experimentation right now on how we are able are on targeting to come up with products, construction products that are coming from textile waste combined with cement and other construction materials. Looking forward to come up with this. This is already experimented and we're looking for partners actually so that we can launch this product in the market in the future, maybe expanding our products to fluted panels that are made of textiles, discarded textiles and the like. Then we recycle. We continue to recycle, cut those cuts or scraps into bags, pouches, and other accessories. These are their actual products. Then we repurpose. Creative upcycling by providing eco furnishings. This one here is a throw pillow, and inside the throw pillow are also scraps of textiles to make it more like a cushion. And then these are actually pot holders, and we look forward of partnering with the hospitality industry for coming up with patchwork blankets and as well as blankets and bed sheets and maybe pillows so that hotels in Marawi City or in Lanao do Sur will make use of patchwork or sustainable blankets and pillows for their beddings. We repair by fighting fast fashion mentality and throwaway culture. So we are going to encourage students in the community that instead of them throwing their secondhand garments, that can be repaired, that can be reused for another product. And this one here, the picture shown our commitment to educate the public about secondhand fashion or circular fashion. So their products are being showcased in a fashion show that is conducted by psychology department in our university. And in the future, we would like to come up with Sue Your Story workshops to teach customers and students basic repair skills in uh, repair skills for sewing and mending their fabrics. We rethink by innovating our business models, maybe by providing circular subscriptions, closet swap service for customers to exchange all near now items. Then rental model, we would like to have this as well. And then in the future, we are actually thinking of forming or creating a community closet similar to community pantry, where everyone will be inspired to provide or to have their clothes in one location, and then everyone can access it and everyone can make use of it and then can own it as well. So that's our targets. Then we recover. So this is also what we are looking at since it's not yet being applied in the production. So we're looking forward of making use of textiles that can be compostable to for the regeneration of nature, achieving the circular economy principles. These are our products and the achievements that we have, the circular solutions that we have. However, we have a lot. We actually have challenges in especially in scaling the startup. the circular fashion, consumer sensitization, and as well as shifting mindset. So among consumers, there are actually um, hesitant, some, most, or maybe, or not, yeah, most of the consumers are actually hesitant of buying secondhand clothes. So that is what of our challenge. How do we shift the mindset of these people? And then another challenge is the financial constraints, then the supply chain gaps, and then operational hurdles. So I'll dig deeper into them one by one. So we have the consumer sensitization and shifting mindset, preference for cheap and fast fashion, the stigma around secondhand or waste-made products, and as well as limited awareness of environmental impact. So consumers do not know that if they throw their garments in the environment, this actually cause harm in the environment. So that is actually the kind of mindset that we would like to educate to make them aware. Second is the financial constraint. We actually was able to partner with Rochester Institute of Technology. Supposedly, they are going to provide us um, funding for machineries and equipment. However, it was halted. Supposedly, we are about to receive it way back in January or February. However, it was halted. It's because of um, Trump's policy to stop AIDS among other countries. So we weren't able to receive the funding, and we're looking for partners so that we can scale up our production and increase our impact in the community. So there's limited startup capital for equipment and production. Actually, the capital are produced by the students, and they bought secondhand machines, sewing machine, just to make sure they can operate their business. High cost of recycling and upcycling machinery, especially for grinding and shredding those uh, uh, garments, scraps, and turn them to become material for the construction products that we are thinking of. Then the lack of capital for research and development. Third, supply chain gaps, and sorting waste. Um, in the Bangsamoro region, there is no formal textile waste collection. So all waste are mixed together and dumped into one place, and then reliance on informal ukay-ukay networks, and as well as donations from friends and other people who are also environmental advocates. And then mixed material fabrics are hard to recycle. So we're thinking of how can we shred them, or maybe grind them, or maybe what could be the right process in order for us to come up with a material that is good for our future products. Then operational hurdles. Since it's a student-led enterprise, there is this um, sentiments of drawing the line between an academic requirement and a real business. So some of the founding members are still not able to embrace the reality that they are already actual entrepreneurs, and that I've been convincing them uh, to make sure that you have to embrace the concept, you have to embrace the reality that you're already entrepreneurs. And then the lack of legal and financial infrastructure. So we are still in the process of registering for our Bureau of Internal Revenue, or BIR permits, and then the lack of creative and technical skills. So in order for them to start their business, actually, the students were able to access a training from the provincial government, training for dressmaking and sewing. So they were able to join the training. That's why they were able to start their operation way back in September. So this one is our meeting with one environmental advocate, Sir Panda, because he wanted to expand our operation, and we're looking for partners so that they will help us on how we'll be able to scale up our operations. So Sir Panda told us that he would like us to lobby to the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources and Energy, because he wanted, we desire for community-driven circular fashion environment. These are our targets. And also, um, looking for policy and looking for our initiative would aim to influence policymakers, the academia, and the industry players, encouraging them to manufacture and retailers to adopt circular supply chain practices. For my final thoughts, to scale circular fashion in policymakers should institutionalize textile waste um, collection and upcycling programs, provide financial incentives for circular startups like Naya now. Hopefully, we will be able to have a great partners, then promote sustainable sourcing and education in circular economy and foster industry collaboration to a long-term roadmap. So Naya now is still as a very small startup, but we look forward of impacting great in the environment and the community that we serve. So I guess it's time for us to rethink fashion, not just what we wear, but how we create, consume, and give new life to what we already have. At Nair now, we embrace circular approach that transform textile waste into opportunity, inspires mindful consumption, and empowers communities to embrace sustainability. Together, we can weave a future where fashion is not just stylish, but also responsible, regenerative, and representative of the values that we have, the culture that we have, and the identity that we have as human beings. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have learned something for today.
Thank you for your talk, Professor Bautista. I think you raised a lot of important issues there. High costs of recycling and the machinery, mixed waste materials being very difficult, legal and financial infrastructure. So there's an awful lot of challenges, clearly to scaling these sort of responsible startups. And we do already, I encourage everyone to put their questions into the Q&A section. We do already have one question, so I'll jump straight onto that. Do you envisage that this initiative could be amplified with the support of government and other stakeholders, so that other jurisdictions, particularly African countries where the second-hand textile industry business is booming, can learn from what you've been doing?
Yeah, that's why we are actually looking for partners so that this initiative will be replicated wherever the globe, because we wanted to impact greater communities. We wanted to impact not just our community, but as well as those communities that actually need that are actually I'm sorry. Yeah. So we wanted to replicate this. That's why we are looking for plenty of partners wherever they are all over the globe.
Thank you for that. I think we've got potentially a follow-on question from that as well. So I'm going to hand over to that participant.
Thank you very much, Dr. Inez, and thank you, Professor Bautista. I was the one who asked the first question, and this is just a follow-on question, especially about the part with the cement blocks that have been made. And
Yes.
I'm just also wondering if there are also concerns or considerations relating to this idea being patented or protected so that the ideas are not stolen, because these are unique considerations which nobody else, I think, for now has thought about, especially within an African context. So I'm just wondering if that's also a consideration, just to protect your intellectual property and that of your students. Thank you.
Yeah, we are on the process of working on the intellectual property registration of products that we're able to come up with. I'm part of the intellectual property office of the Mindanao State University before, so I am actually into advocating as well, protecting the intellectual property rights of my students.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for that. And I think we'll just end one sort of last question for myself, which hopefully will lead into our next talk. Is you're talking about the 7 Rs, and you're clearly thinking about the sort of whole supply chain. How much of your attention is focused on the beginning of life versus the active use phase? So how much of it is focused on the materials that you use versus how long people are able to use those materials, those garments for?
The reason why we thought of coming up with new construction products is in order for us to close the loop in the system, that after the useful life of the products that we're able to sell, and that we collect them again for our part of our responsibility to collect them, and then those that are discarded, that are about to be discarded already, will be transformed to become construction materials as for building constructions, and that will be the last end of life of our product as structured building. So that's what we are thinking actually, so that our products will not end up to the landfill. We zero in with the construction materials. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, construction materials tend to have much longer lifespans than fashion materials. So of course, that does enable you to get it into a sort of new loop, which might last a bit longer. So finally, thank you, Professor Bautista, for all of those valuable insights. And I will now move on to our second speaker, which is Dr. Helen Maguire from Atlantic Technological University, which is in Ireland. She is head of School of Home Economics, and she has authored papers on sustainability and maximising the sustainability of clothing. And her talk is going to be on clothing repair as a climate act. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Maguire, and really looking forward to your talk.
James. Thank you very much, James. And hello, everyone. It's afternoon in Ireland, so you are very welcome. I'm just going to share with you my presentation and get going. So that was a wonderful opening presentation from Professor Charlou. Thank you so much. And much of that links in with the areas that I'm going to talk about as well. So as James introduced, I'm delighted to join you here today from Atlantic Technological University in Ireland on this International Day of Zero Waste event, and focusing on fashion and textiles and clothing particularly. So tiny little bit about me, first of all, and about ATU, where I'm coming from, because I know this is a global audience and some of you may not be very familiar. So I'm based in the Atlantic Technological University in the northwest of Ireland. You can see a little arrow pointing there. It's a beautiful day here today on the shores of Lough Gill, just outside Sligo, overlooking the beautiful Lake Isle of Innisfree that W.B. Yeats made famous in his poetry, if any of you are familiar with that. And the Atlantic Technological University is a large university. It's a virtual multi-campus technological university which has just been in existence since April 2022, with the merger of 3 previous institutes of technology, and then St. Angela's College, or St. Angela's campus of ATU now, incorporated in November 23. So that's where I'm coming to you from, on number 9 on the map there as I'm showing you. Obviously, we are based in Ireland, in Europe, and it is wonderful to join you today. So ATU is a large population of students, about 25,000 plus students studying over 600 academic programs, and I am joining you from the School of Home Economics. So that's the discipline area that I work in. I am head of a large academic school here with approximately 50 academic staff, admin and technical support officers, and about 25 of whom are specialist academics in home economics. So we do have a National Centre of Excellence for Home Economics here in ATU St Angela's, and we are working nationally and internationally in the scholarship of the discipline Home Economics and offering programmes of study up to level 10 in Home Economics. And we indeed have a bursary available at the moment for study in the discipline Home Economics. So that's the kind of key area that I'm talking to you from today, and I'm going to link that with the topic of zero waste. So any of you that are familiar, I know there are different forms of home economics internationally, but the International Federation for Home Economics talks about the 4 areas of practice of the discipline, and it identifies particularly, of course, it is an academic discipline and a curricular subject area. In Ireland, that curricular subject area covers the aspects of food studies, textiles, fashion and design, and family resource management, the latter 2 of which link in closely with this area of research I'm going to present today. And also they talk about the arena of everyday living in households, families and communities. And that arena is a huge contributor towards waste and textile waste. And so that is the particular arena that this research was based in, looking at the everyday life of users of clothing and how we wear, care and repair for our garments. So this area of research was something that I had a real affinity and interest in from a very young age. So in my own family of origin, repair was an everyday practice. There was an acceptance that, you know, clothing and textiles were a resource and they were, you know, constructed. I grew up in 1980s Ireland in a family of 8, so resource management and use was an important area to focus on in terms of that particular period and the ongoing recession in the landscape of the country at that time. And garments and fabrics were often, you know, repaired, restyled, upcycled, repurposed, and end of life was only considered, you know, after a very long period of time. And perhaps some fun was had, as you can see here, with dressing up in the meantime. So for me personally, I suppose moved then into a career as a home economics teacher and lecturing in home economics. And it was probably only after some time doing that role that I suppose it came into my conscious awareness that perhaps my perspectives were not maybe widely shared, and indeed that they were increasingly at odds with the ever prevailing and pervasive clothing consumption culture and practice that was growing around me, where really kind of clothing hauls were something to celebrate, and we were moving towards more and more alarming consumption of clothing, underutilization of clothing, which has and is causing a detrimental sustainability impact globally. So I think Professor Charlou pointed out quite a lot of the research in that regard. I won't repeat it, but maybe just to look at in particular in relation to clothing active wear. We are coming to a point where some of the research is showing that each item purchased is worn less and less, perhaps as little as 10 times in total before it's discarded, and that, you know, clothing has the 4th highest impact on the environment and on climate change over its life cycle, after only food, housing and mobility. That's from the Environmental Research Association in 2002. So really these kind of sustainability challenges can be attributed to 2 underlying causes of existing societal structures and also the insidious drive towards satisfying our daily needs and wants. And really from this perspective, any type of zero waste goals or sustainable consumption hopes really are challenging, and sustainable consumption in this regard is really an oxymoron, because kind of transformational approaches are really urgently and critically required. And it's a huge, really systemic level improvement that's needed, because the fashion system particularly is very linear in its makeup traditionally and continuing on an ongoing basis. So it's kind of locked in a state of disconnection, uncontrollability, extraction, a growth focus, and a disposability with little evidence of true transition to date. So it is a very challenging space, and this is something that I suppose I wanted to explore a little bit more in Ireland, which is a particularly different context to the context that Professor Charlou was talking from a few moments ago, but interesting nonetheless, because there was a dearth at that point of information in relation to Ireland. So marking this 2025 International Day of Zero Waste, the focus is on fashion and textiles particularly. And so from that perspective, I am talking to you a little bit more about use, and that use of our clothing matters. And this is coming to you from the perspective that if we look into our wardrobes, the most sustainable piece of clothing is the one that we already own. And so therefore the clothing active use phase comes into focus, and it's potentially a vital piece of the puzzle to support advancement towards clothing sustainability transitions and zero waste goals. So this research, admittedly, of course, was small scale, local and qualitative, but there are still nonetheless important learnings and some scalable insights that we can draw from this research. So to tell you a little bit more about it. The particular study that I'm talking to you about and going to give you some findings from looked at both sustainment and sustainabilities in relation to our clothing consumption. So looking at extending and elongating the active life of clothes, sustaining, and then also our abilities to sustain around repair competencies of consumers in Ireland, and what the potential extension of the life cycle might be through repair. So research in the UK by WRAP UK found that even extending the life of clothing by an extra 9 months has the potential to reduce carbon waste and water footprint by around 20 to 30% per garment, and have an estimated £5 billion of savings per year, reducing the cost of our resources, reducing the energy supply for laundry, and also for disposability. So quite simply, if clothes have a longer usable life, they can be replaced less frequently. We can reduce the volume of waste discarded, moving towards a zero waste scenario, and fewer resources are consumed in clothing manufacture consequently. So I suppose the words in the title, everyday and practices, do indicate that, you know, the research was conducted from a theoretical frame of practice theories, and it took an everyday geographies approach in framing the study. So it essentially explored everyday clothing consumption practices in Ireland and mined the data generated for insights for sustainability transitions. It was, I suppose, you know, with the perspective that use matters, and looking at the commonly assumed make, buy, dispose approach to see was that actually in fact what was happening in Ireland at the time, because little was known about everyday fashion consumption practices post-purchase. So we have quite a lot of data on consumer practices and purchasing behaviours, quite a lot of data in relation to disposability of clothing and end use of clothing, but not a lot of research in the middle, in the use phase. So 4 contexts were explored, I suppose, considering the global and EU context, which is changing quite rapidly, and we have legislation coming into play that is impacting on that, considering the Irish context as a particular scale, and then looking in the really micro level at the household and the practice theoretical context with everyday practices. Really, the exploring the value and the potential of this standpoint really positioned the research in the use phase, and it looked at kind of, I suppose, up-to-date qualitative research to discover how consumer actions and expectations and behaviors are related to clothing lifetimes. And there is some other research in this area which is I suppose, emerging and which is impacting on the work that I was doing, and which, you know, I suppose should be mentioned here. Professor Charlou did mention the whole area of circular economy, but these are some other emerging clothing consumption culture and practices literature which I considered. So obviously around broadening the acceptability of clothing repair, engaging in clothing repair, and willingness to actually wear a repaired item following the repair was very critical to consider, but also a range of other literature around I suppose non-economy driven clothing acquisition methods like swapping, renting, leasing, broadening the discussion around secondhand clothing acquisition, and also looking at, you know, moving to a use-oriented clothing economy, accepting that maybe we need to consider more anti-consumption aspects of clothing, or resizing our clothing and fashion for a fairer consumption space. So such research is emerging. I've linked some of it there for those of interest, and that, I suppose, set the context for a different emerging clothing consumption culture and practice, as opposed to the clothing haul consumption and culture and practice that I mentioned a few moments ago. So this particular study involved, I suppose, a problem-centered and an innovative wardrobe study approach. So it was a specifically generated, innovative methodology with multiple stages. The ethics for the study were approved through University of Galway, and I worked there in association with Professor Francis Fahy on this research. And the data was collected at a household scale in Ireland, in and around people's homes and their wardrobes. There were 15 cases and 3 generational groups explored or examined. So stage 1 involved problem-centered interviews with these participants, and stage 2 involved a detailed wardrobe interview, including a wardrobe audit, a clothing diary completed for the period in between the interviews, a household tour, and stilled photographs. So some of those tools were shared from previous research in the UK by McLaren et al. And particularly looked at clothing longevity practices in the UK. So the participants in this study can be seen, I suppose, as illustrated on this table. They were made up of the 3 generational groups of young adults, parents with young children, and older adults. And this type of life cycle assessment approach has been proven useful in other similar studies in this field, because I suppose depending on where we are at our particular life stage may mean that we have different consumer practices or preferences, different consumer behaviors, and potentially different needs and requirements in terms of clothing use, which impact on our everyday practices. So this is an approach that is, I suppose, prevalent. So you can see from the title and the focus of the study that I did focus on clothing active wear. These are some images that link to that. It was very interesting to talk to people about their research, about their practices in this research in relation to clothing wear, managing their available, coordinating clothing, selecting clothing to wear, extending life between washing, and their kind of social and experiential relationship with clothing, as well as their attachment to particular garments that impacted on clothing use and longevity. I don't have time today to present the findings in relation to wear or care, which I also looked at, but we are going to focus on clothing repair. So in terms of care, obviously that was focused on things like stain removal, spot cleaning between washing, maintenance, and I suppose extending the life through maybe removal of lint or pilling, and understanding how consumers reacted to care instructions, care labeling, detergents, and their practices in relation to drying garments. So all of that information is available in some of the other papers out of this study, which I'll link you to as well. So this afternoon, I'm I suppose, focusing on the outcomes in relation to repair, maintenance, and supporting us to extend the life of garments, avoiding deterioration of garments, maintaining it in a high quality state for quite a long time. Also perhaps maybe upgrading some parts of garments, maybe removal of parts, maybe upcycling and remodeling, all could come under extending the life of the garment through repair so that it continues to be functional and usable by the householder or the consumer. So to look at I suppose where you can read a little bit more about those findings in these papers, and I'm going to particularly focus on the last paper there around, you know, repair and sewing practices across this intergenerational sample group. So the outcomes detailed in this presentation and some of the findings relate to repair know-how, and that's where participants are undertaking self-repair, procurement of professional repair services, and that's where they would be, I suppose, sourcing third-party repair, either paid repair or commercially available, small cafe style repair services, or unpaid repair services by a third party, maybe a family member. And then I also will talk a little bit about the outcomes in relation to repair decision making and the barriers and enablers there. Again, we won't have a huge amount of time to look at intergenerational differences and similarities, which were also analysed, but we'll talk a little bit about that, and the overall acceptability of wearing repaired garments. So interestingly, the overall acceptability of wearing repaired garments was very positive across all of the intergenerational groups explored in this research. And there wasn't particularly a preference as to whether the repair type was hidden or visible. So that was quite interesting as well, that sometimes I suppose there is a certain maybe social hesitancy or stigma around the wearing of repaired garments, and that wasn't found in the findings of this study. Indeed, some people, you know, were happy to have a visible repair showing. So some of the details in relation to repair know-how and self-repair, this was obviously of interest to me particularly, and to home economists out there, if any of you are in that field, because it is something that comes into our curricular subject area and that we teach in the discipline home economics. So the participants across this study did have a basic capacity to assume simple garment repairs using either hand sewing or basic tools. And they ranged from that to several participants who were very competent technically to undertake advanced garment repairs, alterations and style detailing. The more competent participants were in the older adult category or age group. And the spectrum of practices that people were engaging in terms of self-repair did mirror previous studies and ranged from quick fix mask repairs, maybe with pins or maybe with you know, wand web to iron on and undertake quick restoration tasks, to much greater upcycling and remodeling. And that was observed across the cohort and is reflective of previous studies. Most participants in this research, 11 out of the 15 cases, did possess sufficient skills to enable them to undertake, at the minimum, rudimentary hand sewing garment repair practices. And they did express the confidence to do so. So they would be, I suppose, defined as equivalent to novice status, linking with earlier research. By Barker et al. In 2007. So those, I suppose, and by Gwilt in 2021. So 2 out of the 15 participants in this research were much more proficient or could be described as kind of having amateur repair competencies. And 4 participants admitted to possessing no sewing skills, 1 of which was a young adult participant, and 3 were in the parents with young children category. one of whom was a male participant. That was the only male participant in this study, I should say, because the participants self-selected for inclusion in the study because it was a very in-depth study. That was the sample selection mechanism, but it would be interesting to have more of a I suppose more of a gender spread as well in further research. All but one participant identified having learned their sewing skills and competencies in school, and the post-primary subject home economics was predominantly mentioned as a source of that. But one participant who did not mention that was, in fact, the male participant who learned sewing skills from a parent. So lastly, around repair know-how and self-repair, just to mention that day-to-day implementation of repair skills was scant among some participants. So even though they did possess the skills to undertake repair, they weren't actually doing that on a day-to-day or everyday basis. And the older adult participants were those who were shown to most likely engage in everyday repairs, while the two other groups, young adult and parents with young children, were inclined to report turning to close family members, particularly their mothers, when everyday clothing repair was required. So interestingly, we are aware that, I suppose we do live in a very busy society and that time is a limiting factor in this drive to increase the prevalence of clothing repair. Participants in this study mainly reported to strive to achieve repairs that were invisible or hidden insofar as possible, but they weren't adverse to wearing repairs that were more visible, particularly when they were maybe incorporated as a fashionable aesthetic highlight maybe on the garment. And both in the case of alterations self-performed and outsourced, the consensus was that there was a desire for the modification to improve the overall garment wearability and extend its life. In relation to procurement of professional repair, that would be third-party repair. These kind of commercial ventures were highly valued for convenience and also for the professional level of finish achieved by using a professional repair service. And 12 out of the 15 participants who regularly or occasionally used professional repair services agreed that they considered such services good value for money. So that was in contrast to previous studies where some of the studies showed that professional repair costs were prohibitive and they were regarded as a barrier to repair. So in this case, that wasn't found in this study in Ireland. There was a consensus among the cohort that it was easily possible to access professional repair services in their locale. Maybe again, this is contextual, showing a strong level of repair culture in the northwest region of Ireland that makes way for such services to exist and remain viable businesses. And again, there are other studies which are showing that that is more challenging, even though now across Europe there are several cases of the use of technology, almost like an Amazon-style approach where consumers can log their repair requirement, send I suppose decide on a service that they're going to avail of, have a self-addressed envelope sent to them to put the repair in, and then receive it back completed. So we are moving to a situation where even if a repair service outlet isn't available in the locale, that there are ways and means of accessing that easily. So the consensus among this cohort was that they did want to engage with repair. The young adults, I suppose, just interestingly linked the alterations to occasional wear items, particularly, maybe denoting that the cost of repair was more easily justified for higher end items rather than for routinely used everyday items. And there were only 3 participants in the research who didn't avail of professional repair services, 2 of whom were both very self-proficient in repair and 1 who had access to unpaid repair services via a competent relation. So I suppose that impacted on their approaches used. To look a little bit briefly, as I know time is tight, in relation to repair decision making, some of the barriers and some of the enablers around this, it was very interesting to discuss with the participants and to get them to select from their wardrobes some items that they had held on to for a very long time, that they perhaps had repaired either self or professionally, and that they continued to wear after a long time. And mainly the things that the participants talked about, they revealed a wide variety of reasons that influenced whether they chose to repair a particular item of clothing. Some of the key reasons cited were their own personal level of repair skill and confidence, and that did act as a barrier if they didn't feel confident to undertake repairs, and that is shown as reflective of earlier research. Time was also an issue and a barrier, the time it would take to complete the repair. Some people talked about kind of stockpiling a repair pile and getting around to it at some point or eventually, but not necessarily being a priority. And again, that was linked to maybe the excessive amount of other garments that people had available to them for use. And the last point here around disinclination to repair or laziness towards repair was a surprising finding. And when that was probed further, it was linked to that fact of having a wide range of similar garments available to repair, which illustrates, I suppose, the consequence of fast fashion and the maybe increasing user detachment towards our garments, that waste and disposability is so prevalent, and the value towards the item is not necessarily always strong. So we looked at and explored that value question a little bit more in terms of barriers and enablers, and the garment value, I suppose, had two elements to it that emerged in the data. Some participants identified that they held their item in great value, that it generated an emotional attachment for them, that it sparked memories of times that they bought the item or wore the item for a particular occasion or at a particular time in their life, and therefore they placed a high value on the clothing item and decided to repair the item consequently. And then the second element of value was around the purchaser or the consumer or the householder talking about the initial purchase price of the item and trying to, I suppose, balance that value or that monetary economic value with either the potential cost of the repair if they were paying for repair professionally, or the time that they needed to give to the repair of the item, weighing up and swaying to see, was it ultimately effective and efficient and economical to undertake the repair? So those conversations were very interesting to have with the participants and to understand their, I suppose, associations, their thought processes in that regard, in relation to potential to repair. There was also quite a lot of detailed within case and cross case analysis undertaken, particularly with the focus on exploring the practices through an intergenerational lens, which we don't unfortunately have time to look at in detail today, but some noteworthy insights did emerge there, and you can refer to those in the full published paper. So I suppose linking back clothing repair as a climate act and trying to consider potential for this, I suppose, small scale, qualitative, limited and contextually based research to make a difference in this discussion. It did, I suppose, prove a fruitful methodological approach to uncover wear, care and repair practices of the participants, which are often not something that we have quite a lot of information on. This kind of practice-based research did provide further understandings of everyday practices. As a cautionary note, I suppose, unfortunately, many of the participants were often not aware of their sustainability impact or their climate impact. And they were often undertaking these everyday practices quite inadvertently, even the positive ones. So that is something that we, I suppose, need to think about at a policy level and see how these insights can provide information useful for future sustainability policy impact, and how these kind of, I suppose, everyday snapshots into the everyday clothing wear, care and repair practices can be used positively to impact towards a zero waste culture in fashion and clothing. And obviously there are insights for education as well, not just for home economics as a discipline, but also for other curricula, and educating consumers around their impact around their clothing use extension practices potentially. This is another little infogram from a presentation I recently gave on the study, so I think it's quite a nice little summary, and it ties back into some of the key findings around, particularly resource management of clothing in our homes and in our wardrobes. The majority of participants had got quite good skills to undertake repair, but was it actually happening in every day? Not always. And I really welcome your questions, your comments and your thoughts on the study. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Maguire. It was clearly a very comprehensive study, even if it was a limited number of cases, and you've obviously gained a lot of insights out of that. It's very valuable to know that people don't mind if the repair is visible. Clearly that's something that people might have thought as a barrier, but it isn't there. People do have access to be able to repair their garments. So that's not necessarily a barrier either. So it seems like it mainly comes down to a question of time and cost. Do you think that has been a major driver of fast fashion, that clothes have become quicker to buy and cheaper to buy over the years? Or do you think there are other influences that are equally important?
I do agree, James, that is one of the, I suppose, main influences, because the participants that I was speaking to, that question around value and the initial cost price of the garment and whether it was worth the time and the economic input to actually repair it, particularly when maybe they had, a number of other similar items available to them. That obviously, that was a big impact. We haven't talked here at all, I suppose, about, design for durability, which is an important maybe aspect of this conversation. And I suppose I wasn't concentrating on the product design, but that would obviously influence, if we're looking at trying to take some of this information and give it back to clothing designers, clothing brands, putting some kind of, I suppose, responsibility on garment producers to design garments that are durable, are capable of being repaired, are designed maybe with repair in mind, or even with spare parts available for repair. That's another whole aspect of this debate.
Absolutely, yes. And I think on that point, do you think for the large companies, the very big producers of garments, that are in a global, very competitive marketplace, do you think there is a genuine potential for them to pivot towards sustainability at potentially increased cost? Or do you think this needs to come from either government legislation or consumers themselves?
Yeah, I suppose at the moment what we're seeing is only happening on a small scale. I think it absolutely does need to come from government initiatives and be genuinely supported. We are in an economic society. It has to be economically viable for the industry to take on some of these initiatives. But we are at a point where, clearly at a tipping point in terms of the amount that it is producing. It's still growing exponentially. And the waste is causing a serious problem. Each of the speakers have indicated the extent of that waste. So I think we are at a point where it does need to be seriously, considered in terms of policy and, producer responsibility. I think that is critical, and policy in that regard is important.
So we don't seem to have any additional questions from the floor yet. So I'll allow myself to have one more sort of final question. Clothing repair as a climate act. I love it as a title. I think it's a very good concept. But you highlighted at the end of your talk that actually a lot of the people who were repairing their clothes weren't doing it as a climate act. They were doing it because they had either an emotional attachment to the item, or because they considered it viable in terms of either low cost or low time input. Do you think there is an opportunity for that concept to grow so that people actually repair their clothes, not because it's a opportunity cost benefit, but because it is a climate benefit?
I think, that's where we need a more educated consumer and householder and, I suppose, clothing user. That's where we need, I suppose, to make sure that people do have these basic skills, that they actually can easily and conveniently and quickly undertake these type of, simple repairs to prolong life. A lot of this is quite accessible. It's quite, I suppose they are straightforward things that we can do. But that has to be weighed up with the viability of doing that to a garment that maybe is a fast fashion item. So it is like, I suppose I would suggest there's quite a lot of education required there in this area. And as consumers become more and more aware, they will link it more. So I suppose some of the consumers that I spoke to and some of the householders were aware, but others were undertaking these practices because it was what they had seen or they had been taught in their homes, and they were innate everyday practices that were routine and habitual, and that they accepted as being the right way to approach garment care. And I think the more we have a sociocultural acceptability to that, we move away from disposability as being the common approach to a scenario where we do respect the resource of clothing and try to then obviously increase its longevity and reduce its waste and reduce our level of, I suppose, engagement in fashion cycles and overconsumption, and just be more aware of that. So yes, consumer awareness and education and engagement is huge in this debate.
We do have one additional question from the floor now as well, so I'll hand over.
Thank you, Dr. Inez, and thank you, Dr. Maguire. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
So, yes. So my previous question and this question is coming from a legal perspective, because I'm more concerned about the sustainable management of electronic waste. So these discussions are so interesting because I see similarities between discussions with this particular waste stream and e-waste in general. So I think my question really is, do you think that apart from looking at how we should focus on the circularity of textiles, do you think that the greatest responsibility lies with the producers rather than the consumers? Because I find that in research and in ongoing international debates, there seems to be a lot of conversation around, consumerism as a way to prevent, pollution. So I'm just wondering, based on your research, would you say that who bears the greatest responsibility, basically?
Thank you for the question. And of course, there is a huge responsibility on, I suppose, on all of us, all of us Earth inhabitants, on ensuring that we approach things responsibly. But I do totally take your point. We are moving into much more of, I suppose, a legislative framework where we see, you're talking about e-waste there. We see the right to repair legislation now coming on stream for e-waste and for a variety of types of products. It isn't yet linked to clothing, but that whole right to repair approach is something that I suppose can be applied to clothing. We have seen several European countries now, Sweden included, which have taken in tax incentives for professional repair services and are encouraging, such businesses in their generation and in their existence. It's still not connecting back to the producer, but it is moving towards supporting more longevity of clothing. And one of those services in the UK, I know, is collecting data on the types of repair that consumers are doing and using that to feed back and link with the producer more. So for example, that they would be able to provide information around, particular garments that have been repaired, the ones that, are popular in terms of being sent for repair, or of, breaking and wearing too quickly, that can feed back into the producer's maybe design process. But I do agree that, I suppose legislation and laws around the producer are something that needs further attention and action.
Thank you, Dr. Maguire.
Thank you, Dr. Maguire, and thank you for the question as well. I will now hand over to Denise to close the session. I hope that everyone who has joined us has found it very informative. I know I definitely have. And I hope it's inspired some people maybe to be repairing their clothes, or even starting a business repairing people's clothes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rob, for leading us through that discussion, and to our speakers, Professor Charlou, Bautista and Dr. Helen Maguire. I found it fascinating. It was really, really interesting, and I thought that the comparisons between the two talks were really complementary to one another as well. And I think that it was making me think about sort of my own usage and my approaches to kind of the whole make, do and mend, I guess, as would be a phrase that those of us in the UK and Ireland might be familiar with. I don't know if that translates as well overseas. But also interesting about just the intersections of things like generational approaches, maybe even just like class indicators as well, and the willingness and I guess psychological acceptability to be seen to be wearing something that has been mended, and how that might be acceptable or not acceptable depending on people's perception of wealth indicators or societal kind of expectations. So there's lots of layers to it, and I thought like with a lot of these things, I think really does highlight as well, and being a technologically sort of focused network, and our universities all sort of subscribing to that, also demonstrates the intersectionality and interdisciplinarity needed to sort of come at these things from both ends. And I think, Rob, your question around, and also the speakers online, starting with manufacture, where do you begin? Where's the emphasis? Where's the priority? And actually, the truth is probably it's across the board. It's with manufacturing and product design. It's the materials themselves, the raw materials, the use of virgin plastics in our clothing and textile consumption, policymakers, but also behavioral psychology and psychological analysis of that kind of consumer behavior as well. So very, very interesting. And I just want to thank you all for giving your time to join us for today's session. And just remind those of you that spoke today, but also our colleagues, academic and students that are online watching, that by virtue of your membership of the WTUN, you are connected to a very broad, vast community of academic and researchers and teaching experts that will be connected into this topic area in some way. And if you were interested in sort of pursuing any ongoing relationships or anything in the talks that has sparked your interest, and you'd like maybe some introductions or find out more, you can always contact myself or my colleague Saffron, who's on the call, via the WTUN Secretariat, or indeed reach out to our speakers here as well. With that, I would just after the hour, I guess, for those of us in British summertime, it's about lunchtime, which means maybe a coffee and something to eat. For those of you further afield and in the Philippines, it's probably getting close to your evenings now. So unless anyone else has any final thoughts, I'll close the session. I just want to reiterate our thanks for taking the time and marking this event with us today.